Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Debatable Discussions podcast. After quite a big break, we are back, we are ready, we have sort of conquered the heights of our final school examinations ever. But obviously we're back today mainly because of the news that have hit this morning, which is that Keir Starmer has resigned. Now this comes as a result of a variety of reasons: unpopularity, the sort of recent issues in regards to sort of policing, and also mainly, to be honest, I think it's due to the results of the Makerfield by-election, where Andy Burnham has gotten a staggering 55% of the vote, becoming the new MP for Makerfield and therefore probably being in a position to contest Starmer for the prime ministerial role. What do you think, John? What has led to this sort of sudden resignation?
Well, I think there's two reasons. You've got the long-term factor. Prime Ministers only resign because of generally how they've performed. And obviously, Keir's had fairly unremarkable governance.
Yeah.
He hasn't been able to attract significant support really since his 2024 election. That landslide victory he won, 411 seats in Parliament. He sort of decimated the Tories, people said. But since then, I think it's 716 days of premiership have just been filled with perhaps controversy, or if not that, just perhaps an inability to achieve something really substantial, which people have wanted. U-turns have been a sort of characteristic of his governance as well, with people not really knowing what Keir wants, what Keir stands for. So I think there is that long-term factor I've mentioned there. Firstly, he's only been able to be in a position to resign because of his premiership. And then there's also a short-term factor, as you were alluding there, Dejan, that has led to Keir's downfall. And that catalyst, perhaps, is the Makerfield by-election, which happened 4 days ago, last week. And Andy Burnham won a fairly resounding victory in what was effectively a vote, perhaps a by-election, on the leadership of the country. The people of Makerfield knew they controlled who would be the next Prime Minister. And that is the case. Burnham's gotten into power effectively. Obviously, between the July the 9th to July the 17th, other Labour MPs will be able to oppose their candidature. However, likely, I think Burnham would probably be the only candidate. Wes Streeting, who was his major opponent, just a few tens of minutes before recording this, has said that he'll support Burnham. Likely because Burnham would have offered a bit of an incentive to Wes Streeting, a sort of cabinet position, perhaps. Similarly, Angela Rayner is going to support Burnham. I think there was rumours that Angela Rayner may be offered the job of Defence Secretary.
From what I've seen, was Health Secretary.
Health Secretary, yeah. No one's sure.
Yeah.
So I saw that she was perhaps receiving defence advice, but she's been offered something. No one knows exactly. And I think there'll be other people. Similarly, Darren Jones, who's Keir's sort of long-standing ally, he was someone that was perhaps a potential candidate, but Darren Jones will know that he won't be able to attract much support. He will definitely not be able to win the leadership contest. So perhaps for him, the right move is to go into that similar direction other people have taken like Wes and almost try to get your foot in the door of the next government. What do you think, Dejan?
Yeah, I think, just spending a bit more time on the Makerfield by-election, actually. I think there's two sort of schools of thought regarding the results and the explanation for the results. And one is the sort of, I'm sorry to say this, but propaganda pushed by sort of the right-wing Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, that are basically saying, look, this isn't a vote for Andy Burnham, this is a vote for Starmer out. And people thought Andy Burnham was going to get Starmer out better than Reform and Restore. I can understand that. I didn't think that was the sort of main reason. I think, yeah, sure, that was a factor. And I think maybe 15% of the vote that Andy Burnham received, yes, it was about getting Starmer out, sure. But I think a resounding majority of that 55% he's managed to get is a result of his time as the mayor of Greater Manchester and sort of people seeing him as an effective local politician. But it's also to do with this divide that a lot of people sort of feel in regards to the north and the south of the country. I think people in Makerfield made a decision knowing that Burnham has a very good chance of becoming prime minister. And, one of the sort of only prime ministers from the north in recent times. I mean, if you look at the Conservatives, you've got Boris Johnson, London, David Cameron from the south, Theresa May,
Yeah,
etc., etc., etc. Keir Starmer was a London MP as well. So it is about making that shift and getting some representation from that area of the country. But it's also, I think, Burnham ran a great campaign. I
yeah,
think, he made it very, very sort of relatable in some way. He was very, very, those cartoon characters of him with the big head and the glasses, him saying his slogan, vote for us, really made him seem as a sort of integral part of the community, which is something that a lot of people try to attack him on, saying, oh, but you're just going to go to London, be Prime Minister, you don't care about the community. And actually, he's managed to flip the script. And instead of sort of backtracking and saying, no, 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 I'll be the MP, I'll be the MP, he sort of made it very clear, with a bit of pushing, to be fair, that if I win this by election and there's a leadership contest, I will stand and I will use that influence for the benefit of the community. I think that's something that a lot of people like. I think, if you're thinking, even in Romania, you having a prime minister or a president from your city or your area, even if in reality they won't be able to do anything substantial, it is still something to do with sort of this local pride. And I think a lot of people will have said, you know what, yeah, how about we have someone else? But also, I think a major reason for Burnham's win was the sheer incompetency of the Reform candidate. I mean, that was just astounding. Every question the guy was asked, he said, "That's not on me. That's not on Nigel and Richard Tice." So, you can't have an MP who actually doesn't really know what they're doing and expect the people to put their trust in them. What do you think, John?
I mean, I agree with the reform candidate. I definitely think the reform candidate could be better. I actually completely disagree with you. I think Burnham only won that election to become prime minister. I think the first point you said was interesting, was that Burnham was great for Greater Manchester. I think there's a few angles here. I think, firstly, not every Bakerfield would regard themselves as being Greater Manchester. There's
Yeah.
a view there that they're from Wigan, not Greater Manchester. Also, not everyone views Burnham as being a great local politician in many ways. Many actually attribute the success of Manchester in recent years. So I think it's the CEO of the Manchester Development Board, or there's something there. There's a body that actually has attributed the success of Greater Manchester rather than Burnham. But I think most problematically about Burnham is that I don't think he'll be a great prime minister because I don't know what Burnham stands for, and I don't think anyone does. Not the people in Makerfield and not the people in the Labour Party. So there's been 5 major U-turns of Burnham in his campaign in Makerfield, which showed a sort of perhaps a slight lack of political integrity, I thought. U-turns on immigration, benefits, gender, and Brexit. They're 4 areas, and there's a fifth one I think was involved in sort of make benefits immigration one. But these are 5 big areas which Burnham sort of just happily U-turns on, flips the script to win support. He lacks a sort of integrity there. I mean, the people in Makerfield knew they were being used as well.
Yeah.
They weren't blind to this. They knew that if they voted for Burnham, they got Starmer out.
Yeah.
Conversely, they would have known that if they voted for Robert Kenyon, who, as we've said there, Dan, was a flawed candidate, so that didn't help.
So poor.
But they knew that if they voted for Robert Kenyon, Starmer would be the prime minister still, because I don't know. I don't think Wes's leadership challenge was strong enough.
I disagree there. I
Do you?
think,
Because
yeah, I think another loss for the Labour Party with such a big candidate. Andy Burnham
yeah,
is
yeah,
probably the sort of
but Burnham's the
biggest
only
candidate the
person.
Labour Party has,
Yeah, but he
and
was.
a loss for them. I think West Streeting would have been able to capitalise on that and say, you know what, this is not due to Andy Burnham. This is due to the failures of the Keir Starmer leadership government, and he needs to go. Otherwise, we're going to lose every single seat if
I'm not
Burnham can't win
convinced.
against a sort of unknown candidate who's made sexist comments openly in the past
I'm not
and who doesn't know
convinced.
what the hell they're doing.
I'm not convinced by that because Wes's support is drastically different to Burnham's.
Yeah,
two different parts of the party. And I actually don't think Wes would have gotten the MPs to trigger a leadership contest. There was huge doubts over that. I think the press totally believed Wes didn't have the support, because I think he was slightly getting a bit frustrated when everyone was asking him, "Are you sure you've got the number of MPs?" I think people in Makerfield knew that they had to vote Burnham to get Starmer out the easiest way.
Yeah.
Also, people in Makerfield wouldn't have wanted Streeting to be Prime Minister as well, likely.
Yeah.
Because Streeting's even more of that metropolitan image you're alluding to than Starmer, perhaps.
Yeah.
Streeting obviously being from East London, an MP there at the moment. So people in Makerfield knew the reason why their previous MP was Josh Simmons had resigned, and why Burnham was fighting that. Burnham was fighting that everyone needed to get into office. A vote for Burnham, then, by extension, wasn't because Burnham is great, has this great political compass, because as we've discussed, no one really knew what he stood for. Perhaps they also didn't feel particularly attached to his work in Greater Manchester. But what they did feel attached to was the chance that Burnham would displace Starmer. Dissatisfaction with Starmer is the main thing. And that was remedied by other things. The Reform vote, only minorly broken by Restore. But as we said there, Dejan, I think on paper, Robert Kenyon was probably a good candidate, but then it was just reality. He unfolded. So on paper, he was a local person who had fought the previous election, a member of the Army Reserves. However, it was sort of when they took him into the debate and perhaps unravelled a bit more of his persona.
I think with that, I think what they were trying to do is sort of replicate what the Greens did in the Gorton and Denton by-election, where sort of local plumber won. But I think what Reform got wrong, and it sort of beat Matt Goodwin, who's one of the big hitters for Reform. I think what Reform actually got wrong is that the reason the person in Gorton and Denton won is not because she's a plumber. It's not the main reason. It was because she actually, apart from just being a local person, didn't have any controversies. No sort of major red flags with comments made on Twitter, and then he's saying, she did not say, "I am sexist, I'm sorry, but I am," end quote. And also, I think the biggest reason is she actually, when asked the question, she was able to answer it, and she didn't just sort of backtrack all the time and saying, I'm going to get 30,000 more police officers. Okay, how are you going to do that? Well, that's the job for the person that's recruiting them. I also think,
she was a more sound candidate.
Yeah, definitely. And also I think, Andy Burnham, we can say whatever we want, but as a personal opinion on him. But I do think his approval rating in Manchester is quite high. I mean, he's won every election over 60% of votes, including a recent one with 63% in 2024, 70% almost in 2021. So he's definitely a popular candidate in the region. But I also think that level of influence that he has is obviously going to be beneficial. When you're coming with a very known candidate, it's almost very hard to beat that. And it takes a miracle to have this unknown local candidate being able to be a national figure. Because, frankly, the amount of people following politics isn't 100%, right? A lot of people would have heard about Andy Burnham and would have said, I have this friend who lives in Greater Manchester who says, the buses are great, so I'm going to vote for Andy Burnham. And I think Andy Burnham's campaign as well was really good. He sort of managed to actually get a page of the Farage notebook. Went to the pub a couple of times, just looked like a very different candidate to Robert Kenyon. I don't think Robert Kenyon was actually that personable at all, especially with women. I find it very, very hard for most women to actually muster the guts to vote for him because of his comments in the past. I think really the defining feature, as you said, it was to get Keir Starmer out.
Yeah, that was my 50 of that 55% vote. Yeah.
But I don't think just purely getting Starmer out was the reason of this level of success. I think it's also, Burnham's national figure. Also, the promise of having a prime minister from your constituency. I think it's something people like,
Yeah, loosely. I mean, you have to remember, though, that people like it, but then there's also a crowd of people who, with Farage, are very keen to say that you lose the local MP side of it. So it's sort of what type of prime minister you want, MP you want, because they will sort of largely neglect, I think, the local issues.
Well, but I think people definitely knew that was what was going to happen. And I think being able to have that, choice of saying, look, what do we want? I think people have chosen, I want my MP to be a national figure and
Yeah.
be prime minister. I think that's a, sound and sort of expected choice, in my opinion. I think something else we need to talk about is reform getting reformed. This sort of current of Rupert and of being even more far right and sort of attacking at reform, the same way reform has done to the Conservatives in the last couple of years. That's what Restore is doing now, and they're splitting the vote. They're stealing people. They're saying reform's not radical enough. They're not right wing. We are the only right wing party in the UK, and it's not going okay. We're going to stop the votes. Going even further, we're going to get away people who are on indefinite leave to remain. Nationals of the UK are going to be deported. I mean, absolutely, excuse my language, crazy ideas. I mean, I don't know who on earth thinks that's a great, way to do things. Let's just deport everyone and, stop, freeze all migration. I mean, these guys live in a fantasy world. They say the lefties, the progressive lefties, live in a fantasy world allowing all this migration, but they live in a fantasy world of their own, thinking that they're just going to magically be able to stop all migration without any sort of serious impact on the British economy.
To be honest, I think everyone's far more concerned about them than I am, because in the past there's been lots of these almost breakaway, far right wing parties, and typically they haven't done very well, simply because there's just not the support, surely, is there for them. So at Makerfield, I think, did they win a couple of percent?
I think they won 7 or 8%.
So they won 7 or 8% in Makerfield, but so that's perhaps a constituency that's could have more voters that are favourable to Restore. But equally, there'll be many constituencies where I just don't think there'd be at all many votes for Restore UK. I think, nationally they will manage to get some votes, but they can chip away a bit at Reform UK. But at the end of the day, I do think there's been many of these parties in the past, far right parties, and perhaps unfortunately, that extreme far right is growing. But I do just think that I just don't think there's enough support for them to have a serious impact, because, as you said, Dejan, their ideas are sort of verging on crazy, and
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, and that's what I think. I think, honestly, perhaps it is growing, this extreme far right, but actually it just won't get enough support.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, I hope you're right. I hope you're
yeah,
right.
yeah,
But I think what's worrying for me is that this is what, everyone, including us, have said about Reform UK with
yeah,
the Conservatives. Never going to happen. And now you look at the latest by election, actually, and the Conservatives got like 1 or 2%. I mean, who thought that was ever going to happen with the Conservatives getting 1 or 2% in an election? Reform sort of 35, Restore 7%. I mean, Restore is also very fortunate that they are getting all this money pumped into them by Elon Musk and using, I'm sure, legal but highly unethical tactics on social media, bots,
yeah,
everything. I mean, the amount of times I see a video that has nothing to do with politics, you click on the comments and the first thing you say is vote Restore.
yeah,
Rupert is the only one who can save us. And, in this sort of current climate with social media and the way people see politics, I'm very, very, very worried that you're going to have a bunch of people who are disgruntled with the system, unhappy with their situation, who are going to sort of wake up actually and realize reform is just a hoax. They've completely fooled me. But instead of actually going back to what we expect, which is sort of traditional parties or sort of more centre, they're going to be even more radicalized to the right wing. And they're going to, and this is not me saying that everyone that votes for Restore is crazy. I think manipulated, sure. Crazy, I don't think so. I think, there's some legitimate concerns that Restore is bringing. But I think the way they're doing it and the extent that they're sort of pushing it is crazy. I mean,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan. I just disagree with them as well. Like you, Dan, I think they're just very right wing.
I mean,
And,
extremists, you could say.
yeah, and worryingly, But I think Farage is just going to judge the current. So just these sort of parties, sometimes they go up in peaks and troughs a bit. Sometimes their popularity can peak. So I think it's a sort of case of almost judging, I think, for Farage and the Tories on the right wing and equally Labour at the moment, is their popularity going to be long term? So I think that's the first judgment they've got to take. And as I said, I'm not convinced they will have at all. They will have a considerable amount of long-term support. But then after that, perhaps it paves the way for a Tory reform coalition. I don't know, to try and unite the right a bit more. But that does come with a lot of challenges. So perhaps I'm not fully convinced on that. But I think
Yeah.
I think with Restore at the moment, it's sort of judging where they're at. Because, I mean, as you're saying there, Dan, I can sort of sense that on the horizon, there's going to be a sort of scandal about them. There's going to be something
I mean, for sure.
scandalous emerging because there's all these calls about them, as you're saying there, using bots on Twitter and things.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm not convinced about their long-term performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think something else that they've got going for them actually is this sort of anti-establishment.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've just literally, what you were talking, I've just Googled their social media page. And the latest post on Restore Britain is, following the rape gang inquiry report released, they are going for Rupert. They. Who is they? It will get worse and worse. Keep calm, stay on track, Restore Britain. So it's that again, it's these people, they, the powerful, controlling, trying to silence us down. And people love an underdog story, right? I mean, some of the best, like Rocky Balboa. The whole reason Rocky Balboa is a great movie is because of the underdog story. People love someone who's against the establishment, who's fighting for them, and they feel betrayed by the establishment. And, for fairly good reason. I think, the last sort of 20 years of government haven't been great. There's been a lot of ups and downs, and mostly downs. But I think, hopefully we'll get to a point where we actually realize that, going more and more to the extremes is not the way to get back what we've lost, but actually going back to the center and sort of being able to have a conversation. But I'm really curious what you think about this. I mean, do you think Restore Britain, just as a bracket for our listeners who are not really sure of the sort of performance, they've stood at the local elections in one place, West Yarmouth, and they've completely wiped it out, 10 out of 10 wins, 7% in this first MP by-election. So, do you think that a party with this track record is actually in danger for Farage? I mean, he's already worried from what I'm sensing, but do you think he's going to get to a point where he gets so worried about Restore that actually there's going to be an opportunity for the Tories to jump back in and steal a bit of that right-wing vote?
Perhaps, but I'm sort of like you, Dan, in a way that I hope Restore will crash and burn, and I do think it will. I think you mentioned obviously their Great Yarmouth, where they did very well in the local elections. The MP for Yarmouth obviously being Rupert Lowe. And I think that is indicative of, Great Yarmouth is the nexus, the focal point, the concentration of their support. But what I said is, and I do think this, is that nationally, I'm not convinced of their level of support. Especially, as we said, because they've got, they are this extreme right-wing party. So yeah, I'm not really convinced. I do think it will sort of crash and burn a bit. I think across the political spectrum, parties like them have recently had quite a lot of support initially. I'm thinking of the Green Party under Spalansky.
Reform.
In the last few months, Reform. These are merged parties that have actually sort of emerged. I know the Greens did exist previously, but they've managed to sort of use slightly more unconventional standpoints, or not necessarily unconventional, but they've sort of been able to have quite quick sort of come throughs. So I think that would be the same, but I think with Restore, it's just this extreme right wing party, which I can't see having long term sustainability. It's sort of like the Your Party of Jeremy Corbyn and Sara Sultana, which I actually thought would do very well. And I still stand by that opinion, because I think the only reason they didn't do well is because of all these internal problems in the party. I think Corbyn and Sultana disagreed on absolutely everything. Obviously, the name as well, they weren't sure what to call it. So they just sort of, I think, stuck with Your Party at the end. But I do think that could have done well just with the same logic that we almost apply to Restore or the Greens or Reform, of these parties who are offering a breakaway from the norm. And actually, I think your party got lots and lots of members, similar
Yeah,
to these other parties when it was initially set up, sort of tens of thousands. I guess.
yeah. I think also, you know, probably Andy Burnham isn't listening to this, but if he
He is.
was, I think his biggest job right now is to actually manage to get the people who have been disillusioned by Labour and who've actually sort of gone on the other side of the political spectrum on the right and get them back into Labour. I mean, and he, I think, can do that because I think he's got the sort of persona and the sort of way of being that he's quite popular with, you know. I mean, the same way that Boris Johnson sort of broke that red wall, you know, Andy Burnham now needs to break the reform wall. I think he can do it. It'll be very challenging, but he can do it. And I think that's the sort of best and easiest way to actually make these sort of fringe groups sort of begin to deflate slowly and slowly. Because if Burnham manages to break through some of these reform held councils and constituencies and manages to get them back on site, that will be the first trigger that reform is going to go away. And you know, Farage, from all his career, every single time the party went down, he went away. Right? So, you know, if you get, and also, reform is basically, it's on Farage's ID card. If he goes, the party goes away. I mean, Zia Yusuf could have stood, just doesn't want to.
Yeah.
Richard Tice, God, just don't see the country going behind Richard Tice.
Yeah.
Who else?
Yeah, but
Robert
perhaps,
Jenrick?
yeah, perhaps, and there are, lots of people, and I agree that Reform is a one-man band, but this whole sort of argument of, oh, okay, if Burnham breaks down Reform councils, breaks down Reform constituencies, it depends on Burnham's performance in office.
Definitely, yeah.
And that is the sole thing, people may like Burnham's personality or they may not, or as I said, they may view him as, constantly doing these U-turns. But at the end of the day, it's what Burnham actually can do. Can he deliver something substantial that pleases the nation? That's the ultimate judge of his character.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know. If I were to be Burnham, I would say have a sort of 10-point plan of things you want to do and things you want to do quickly. But then I would guess every other prime minister's had that. So I think, that's the thing. Ultimately, it depends on his performance, and if I was Burnham, he's got to bring something new, something different, to try and win people over.
Definitely, and I agree with you fully. I think he's going to be judged by what he does in this term as prime minister. But also, I think he actually is in a position to be able to do something, because the last couple of prime ministers, I mean, none of them have been enthusiastically sort of received by the population. I mean,
I don't know, Johnson. You could
well,
say.
no. After Johnson,
Okay.
Johnson.
Yeah.
So, Truss, no. Rishi, not really. Keir, not really.
Was Keir though? Because that's the interesting thing about Keir. You have to remember he won this huge landslide.
He won a huge majority, but I don't think he
Yeah.
won it. I think Labour won a huge majority.
Labour won it, but
and
still
he was there. I don't think people voted. I want Keir as my prime minister. He was quite of this normal, quite stoic figure. People made fun of him, but they were like, you know what, he's a decent person that's going to take us over this circus that the Conservative Party has been.
But still, Keir had the opportunity. He had the nation's backing of the Labour Party. Perhaps not him, but of the Labour Party. I think, and Burnham, who knows if Burnham has that to the same extent? Hasn't been.
I do think he does. I think he actually. I think Burnham has a more.
But does he appeal to people? He may appeal to people in Manchester, but does he appeal to people, let's say, in the northeast then, or in the south?
I would say actually, I think Andy Burnham has more support of the nation than Keir Starmer on his personal name.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on the stage. I think, I'm not.
I think if he takes that in and he takes that sort of momentum forwards and manages to get something done by the end of the year, he's going to be in a very strong position to actually keep going. But I think if he doesn't manage to get anything done quickly in the next sort of 6-8 months, people are not going to look favourably on him, and the approval rating is going to shoot down just as quickly as they did for Keir Starmer.
And my key thing about Burnham is that no one knows what he stands for, and that's his biggest criticism. So what he will do is a key is the key almost variable in this.
Yeah.
What does Burnham want to do? Because previously he wanted to rejoin the EU, but now he says he doesn't want to do that. But who knows? Did he just say that for Makerfield? Similarly, there's been things about benefits for migrants. He said he doesn't want to do that now. Previously, before he did. Where Burnham stands in many areas is sort of unknown, I think. And that will be a variable of what he does, is almost what he believes. And I think if he is going to be perhaps a sort of constant U-turner like Starmer, the nation will lose support in the same way that they did when Starmer did it. So I think the ball's in Andy's court. The ball is in Burnham's court, literally.
Yeah, definitely.
He's the master of his own fate.
Yeah, I think, he's got a big majority.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing really holding him back.
Yeah.
Came off the win of a pretty substantial by-election. I mean, local elections reforms have got 70% of the vote to Makerfield, and he's managed to cut that down by half and something. So, realistically, now all he needs to do is get a team together, win the leadership contest, and from then start governing and get things done. Because if he does that, I think, and this is my prediction, if Andy Burnham has a successful term, I think he can actually maintain a majority. A smaller majority, but I think he can maintain a majority in the next election.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously obvious. If he is successful, he will do well. But equally, the opposite, if he's not successful, he won't do well. But I think, what the key thing here is how he performs. And I'm not convinced. I think he lacks a bit of direction. And actually, I mean, is he going to have a conflicted cabinet? Who knows? He's from the further left side of the party. But then is he going to bring people like Wes Streeting in? I don't know. I think I think we live in this nation at the moment that has almost a revolving, sort of like at a restaurant, like there's conveyor belts. It's a sort of conveyor belts of prime ministers. You take off a dish at a time for a different prime minister. And I think it will be hard for Burnham almost to escape the conveyor belt. It depends on whether he can escape that conveyor belt and sort of make himself a bit more of a permanent figure than another person, like our last two prime ministers who've served sort of around 2 years or just under for both, I think.
Well, I honestly, I genuinely hope he does well, because
I think everyone does.
I think he is, in my mind, frankly, if Burnham fails, I don't think there's a way out from a reform majority.
Yeah.
But if he does well, he can stop that, and I wish him all the best. And I hope he manages to, number one, win this leadership contest, because and we've talked about this before. Everyone thought George Cleverly was going to be the next Conservative leader, but his sort of delegates played with votes, and actually he didn't go through the second round. So hopefully Andy Burnham doesn't do the same thing and starts giving away votes to people he thinks he can be in a final. But win the contest, and then I hope he manages to keep on track. We'll be here talking about what's going on, any new policies, and also, before we end, I also have to say a couple of things. That, number one, we are back to sort of normal uploading schedule, more or less, throughout the summer and from then on. But also, we are currently working on a new thing for the podcast, something that I think will sort of revitalize it a little bit and sort of take it to the next level. But we'll be back with more details very soon about that. In the meantime, wishing you all a nice summer if you're on holiday already. Hopefully, I've written on our Instagram page a sort of beach/pool book that I think would be very nice to read, very short. No number of pages, but actually the time it takes for you to read it, and also the brain power required. Andrew Agassi's new biography, which is not new, but Andrew Agassi's autobiography, Open.
And I'll simply try a book review in the coming days then as well.
Yeah. In the meantime, see you next week.
See you then.
Bye-bye.